Dexter Morgan was a serial killer who spent years hiding in plain sight. He had everyone fooled, his friends, his family, and even the police. But there was one person who seemed to see through him, at least a little. Special Agent Frank Lundy. Lundy wasn't just any investigator. He was an experienced FBI agent who had spent his career hunting serial killers. Unlike the detectives at Miami Metro, who often missed the bigger picture, Lundy had a sharp eye for details and an instinct for when something wasn't right. He led the investigation into the Bay Harbor Butcher, one of Miami's most infamous serial killers. And while the official story blamed Sergeant James Doakes, many fans believe Lundy wasn't completely convinced. Did Lundy ever suspect Dexter? Did he really buy into the idea that Doakes was the butcher, or did he have doubts? If he did sense something was off, why didn't he do anything about it? In this video, we'll go through the key moments that hint at what Lundy really knew, how close he got to the truth, and why he never acted on it. When Special Agent Frank Lundy arrived in Miami, he had one goal: to catch the Bay Harbor Butcher. The case had gained national attention, and the FBI sent Lundy because he was one of their best. He had spent years tracking down serial killers, and this one was different. Whoever was behind the murders wasn't sloppy or reckless. This killer was careful, methodical, and extremely skilled at covering their tracks. Lundy quickly realized the Bay Harbor Butcher wasn't a typical murderer. Most serial killers make mistakes, but this one left almost no evidence. The only reason the police even knew about him was because of the bodies found in the ocean. Dozens of victims, all wrapped in plastic bags cut up with precision. Lundy knew right away that this killer had knowledge of law enforcement and forensics, someone who knew exactly how to avoid getting caught. As he dug deeper, Lundy put together a profile of the butcher. He believed the killer wasn't driven by random urges, but by a strict set of rules. The victims all had criminal pasts, suggesting the butcher thought of himself as someone delivering justice. This was unusual. Most serial killers acted on impulse or emotion. This one? He was controlled, calculated. Lundy's sharp instincts made him a real threat to Dexter. Unlike the other detectives, who were focused on the standard police work, Lundy relied on patterns, behavior, and gut feelings. And it wasn't long before he started noticing things about Dexter that didn't add up. From the moment Lundy took over the Bay Harbor Butcher case, Dexter knew he had a problem. Lundy was different from the usual cops at Miami Metro. He wasn't easily distracted, he didn't take shortcuts, and, most importantly, he actually understood serial killers. Dexter worked hard to stay under the radar, but Lundy's investigation made that difficult. Since Dexter was part of Miami Metro's forensics team, he was expected to assist in the case. That meant analyzing crime scene evidence and even helping the task force build a profile of himself. He had to be extra careful, giving just enough input to appear helpful without leading Lundy in the wrong direction, or the right one. One of Dexter's biggest challenges was making sure none of the evidence led back to him. He was meticulous in how he disposed of his victims, but the discovery of the underwater burial site threw him off. The investigation started moving fast, and Lundy was smart enough to see patterns others missed. Dexter had to act quickly, destroying key pieces of evidence and even manipulating results to throw Lundy and the team off track. At the same time, Dexter was studying Lundy just as much as Lundy was studying the case. He knew that if anyone could figure him out, it would be Lundy. But while the agent seemed polite and professional, Dexter could feel something else, an intense focus, like Lundy sensed he was looking right at the killer without realizing it. Lundy was an expert at reading people. He had spent years tracking serial killers, studying their behavior, and recognizing patterns others overlooked. And while he never openly accused Dexter of anything, there were moments that made it seem like he suspected something was off. One of the biggest signs was the way Lundy interacted with Dexter. Unlike most people at Miami Metro, Lundy never seemed completely comfortable around him. He was polite, but there was an edge to his conversations with Dexter, like he was studying him. He asked Dexter for input on the Bay Harbor Butcher case, but the way he listened was different. It wasn't casual. It felt like Lundy was watching to see how Dexter reacted. There were also small moments where Lundy seemed to test Dexter. In one scene, Lundy talked about how the butcher was unlike any serial killer he had ever seen, how he was precise, controlled, and followed a strict moral code. Dexter, trying to act normal, agreed with him. But Lundy's expression in that moment, it was subtle, but it was almost as if he was waiting for Dexter to say something revealing. Another red flag was how Lundy reacted to the discovery of Dexter's blood slides in Doakes' car. At first, it seemed like the perfect evidence to close the case. But for someone as experienced as Lundy, it had to have felt too perfect. Doakes was aggressive and violent, but he wasn't methodical. He didn't fit the profile Lundy had built for the butcher. If anyone could have recognized that the evidence was planted, it was Lundy. The biggest question is, if Lundy did suspect Dexter, why didn't he act on it? Maybe he didn't have enough proof, or maybe he just kept it to himself, waiting for the right moment. Either way, his subtle reactions throughout the case suggest he wasn't as convinced of Doakes' guilt as everyone else. When Sergeant James Doakes became the prime suspect in the Bay Harbor butcher case, it was a lucky break for Dexter. But for someone as experienced as Lundy, the case might have felt a little too easy. Doakes was aggressive, impulsive, and often violent, but he didn't match the psychological profile Lundy had carefully built for the butcher. The real Bay Harbor butcher was patient, precise, and highly intelligent. Doakes was a trained killer, sure, but he wasn't methodical in the way this killer was. Still, when the FBI found Dexter's bloodslide collection planted in Doakes' car, the case seemed closed. Lundy, for the most part, accepted the evidence. It was solid after all, but did he fully believe it? That's where things get interesting. Throughout the season, Lundy never seemed fully satisfied with the way things wrapped up. He didn't push back against the official story, but he also didn't celebrate it as a major victory. Instead, he moved on, almost like he knew there was more to the story but couldn't prove it. If Lundy had doubts, why didn't he dig deeper? Maybe he realized that proving Doakes wasn't the butcher wouldn't change much. Doakes was dead, and the case was effectively closed. Or maybe, deep down, he did suspect Dexter, but lacked the evidence to do anything about it. In the end, whether Lundy truly believed Doakes was guilty or not remains an open question. But given his experience, it's hard to believe he was completely fooled. Even though the show never confirms whether Lundy suspected Dexter, fans have debated it for years. There are plenty of moments that suggest Lundy might have had his doubts. But if that's the case, why didn't he do anything about it? One theory is that Lundy simply didn't have enough evidence. He was an experienced investigator, and he relied on facts, not gut feelings. Even if something about Dexter felt off, Lundy wasn't the kind of person to accuse someone without proof. Since the case had a clear suspect in Doakes and the evidence backed it up, Lundy had no real reason to keep pushing. Another theory is that Lundy did suspect Dexter, but he knew there was nothing he could do. By the time Doakes was killed, the case was closed. Reopening it would have been a massive risk, especially since the evidence had already been processed. If Lundy wasn't 100% sure, he may have chosen to let it go rather than chase a theory he couldn't prove. Some fans even believe that Lundy suspected Dexter, but respected what he was doing. Throughout the show, Lundy is portrayed as calm and logical, someone who sees the world in black and white. But what if he recognized that the Bay Harbor butcher was different? That he wasn't just another serial killer, but someone who was targeting criminals? Maybe Lundy chose to look the other way because in some way, he saw the butcher as serving a purpose. Of course, this is all speculation. The show never gives a definite answer, which is what makes the debate so interesting. Lundy was sharp, methodical, and rarely wrong, so the idea that he never questioned the case at all doesn't sit well with many fans. Did Lundy know, or was Dexter just that good at hiding? It's one of Dexter's biggest mysteries and one that still gets fans talking today. Special Agent Frank Lundy was one of the smartest investigators in Dexter. He had spent his career studying serial killers, learning their patterns and catching the ones who thought they were untouchable. If anyone had the skills to see through Dexter's act, it was him. While the show never outright says Lundy suspected Dexter, there were moments that made fans wonder. He was careful around Dexter, observed him closely, and didn't seem completely convinced when Doakes was named as the Bay Harbor butcher. If he had doubts, he never voiced them, at least not on screen. So why didn't Lundy act? Maybe he didn't have enough proof. Maybe he wasn't sure. Or maybe, deep down, he knew but couldn't do anything about it. Dexter was careful, and without real evidence, Lundy couldn't make a move. In the end, that's what makes this mystery so compelling. Lundy was brilliant, and Dexter was a master at deception. Who won? We'll never know for sure. But the idea that Lundy, even for a moment, saw through Dexter's mask makes his character even more fascinating. And that's why fans are still asking the question, did Lundy really know? Or was Dexter just that good at hiding in plain sight? Either way, Lundy was one of the few people who ever came close to figuring it out. And if he had lived longer, maybe Dexter wouldn't have gotten away with it for so long. What do you think? Did Special Agent Lundy secretly suspect Dexter, or was he fully convinced Doakes was the Bay Harbor butcher? Could Lundy have caught Dexter if he had lived longer? Or was Dexter always one step ahead? Let's discuss in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more Dexter content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.